Well, Pedro Dom is, well, he lived in the early 2000s, mainly in Rio de Janeiro, and he was a criminal that was very famous. He was well known to the press. He had uh, his he used to rob rich houses, mansions, and what really brought your attention to him is that he broke the stereotype of what you understand as a thief. He was from a middle class family. He was described as good looking, and he had a playboy look even. Light hair, light eyes, and he was murdered very young, very few years by the police. And that story, that project is born out of the idea and the will, the feeling of his dad of losing his son, and not to diminish the acts, the criminal acts of his son, but really to broaden the what is known about him or what was known in the news, what was registered in the news about Pedro. And then we get into the drug addiction, the family context, and especially the relationship of father and son. So Pedro is, to me, a character that is fascinating because he has that dark side that comes from the chemical dependency and the relationship with the criminality, the criminal world. But there is the optics, there is the opinion of his dad and many people that I've known all throughout this process, especially when we filmed on location. The places that Pedro lived and spent most of his life. And I heard reports about Pedro. There were very, people missed him. Speaking, describing him as charismatic and captivating, and he really shone a light. And there are some traumas, of course. There are people that had horrible experiences with him. So he is a fascinating character to me in that sense, without judging, without morality. Once you look at him, you see the choices, the wrong choices, the wrong attitudes, but you see the human aspect, and you end up having the possibility, a more possibility for empathy. This is what is fascinating to me. Eric, I think that Gabriel already mentioned about Victor, and there is the antisocial. We are dealing with that relationship of father and son. So what I can say about Victor is that way back when he was young, by chance, or coincidence, he had contact with the let's just say a secret service that we started to have here in Brazil, and they started to fight against the drugs, and he became like a secret agent of a Brazilian DEA, fighting drugs and fighting cocaine that was just arriving to Rio de Janeiro in the 70s. So this is something that Breno always tells us, our director, is that he is an eyewitness account of that moment that very few people have written about this, because very few people had contact with that, and he was there when one of the first when cocaine first arrived in Brazil, and he started to fight against this, and he became a policeman. And a great deal of his life was moved by this war on drugs, war on crimes. And then, after a lot of frustration, and he realized that his fight was almost lost because of the state structure being completely corrupted, and corruption really ended any possibility of having success in this war. His son had a contact with cocaine, and he becomes an addict, and his chemical dependency really makes the whole family lose its structure, and it hinders the relationship between father and son. And also, the entrance of Pedro in crime only increased the intensity of this dilemma, this conflict of the dad that his entire life he was fighting this war, and it was unsuccessful, but this war got into my place, into my house, and now my son is in an opposite, polar opposite world of mine. So Vitor, he is a guy that, regardless of this, he never gave up on his son. And the relationship of father and son is exactly the core of this series. Of course, based on everything that is happening in the context of everything that is, we have the action part, the adventure part of the series. These are sequences based on real facts. But the focus here is how that was destabilized and how that finished that life that could have been normal, I should say, but it wasn't.
Olha, Eric, uma coisa muito importante que a gente
Well,
sempre
Eric,
frisa, e que acho que está
one of the
dentro
things
dessa
that
questão
we really highlight, and I
de
think
ser
that it's in the
tópico
context
em alta, que é essa relação
of
que se dá ao
being
longo da série
something
quase
that
que
is
o
in
tempo
vogue,
todo,
is that
através
relationship that is,
de
you can
conflitos,
see
de
it all throughout the
embates, de
series,
intrigas mesmo.
that you can see conflicts, you can see
Mas a gente não
fights,
podia em
real
nenhum momento,
fights,
isso veio desde a preparação e ao longo de toda
but
a
we could
gravação, a
not
gente focava muito nisso, eu e o
at any
Gabriel,
point since the
que
preparation and throughout
tocava
all
de
the
fato
recording,
aquela
we really
relação era o
focused,
amor, e por isso
Gabriel
esse
and I,
conflito. Então, por trás
that
daquilo a
what
gente
really
busca esse
permeated the
autoconhecimento,
relationship is
porque
love.
senão a gente
So
poderia
behind all the
simplesmente
conflict, there
resultar em
is
dois
love
inimigos.
between father
De
and
jeito
son,
nenhum eles
because
gostariam,
otherwise
justamente pelo que eu
that
falei.
they
Eles
could just
nunca
be
desistiram
enemies,
do outro, o
and
pai
at
nunca
no
desistiu dele,
point they were
e o
enemies.
filho nunca
They
desistiu do
never
pai.
gave up on
Então,
each
acho que
other. The
talvez
father never
um
gave
dos
up on the son, and
aspectos
vice
mais
versa.
importantes dentro da
So
construção e da
maybe
filmagem
this
dessa
is
série.
one of the most important aspects in the
Uma outra
building and the
característica também
filming
desse
of this
projeto, né,
series.
pelo
Another
tamanho
thing,
dele,
another characteristic of this
é que a gente
project,
por vezes
because of the
filma
size of the project,
em
is
locações
that
reais,
we many
com muitos
times
figurantes, com muita
we filmed
equipe,
on
ou seja,
location, real
uma
location,
estrutura
and
muito
with a lot of
grandiosa ao
teams,
nosso
with a
redor
big team, a very big, grandiose structure
e ao
all
mesmo
around
tempo
us,
vivendo situações
and a lot of
grandiosas,
characters, but
mas
and a lot of actors, but
normalmente falando
in living these
sem,
grandiose
sem se
situations. But as
descuidar
we say, we
do
never
íntimo, do
lost
conjunto
sight
central da
of
história,
the
que é esse
intimate part,
vínculo de pai e
the
filho, por mais
core
às
of
vezes
the
que não
story,
estejam na
which is
mesma
that
cena,
connection
mas
between
em
the father and the
geral,
son.
até nas
Even though
cenas
they're not in
individuais, eles
the
estão
same
sempre
scene,
conectados de
even in
alguma
the
maneira, como você estava
individual
falando.
scenes,
Então,
they're always
não perder
connected. They're always remembering each other. So you should never lose
essa
that
conexão,
that
para isso foi fundamental
connection.
dentro dessa estrutura tão grande, às
That
vezes
was
de muita
fundamental for
gente, de
this big
muita
structure. This is
distração.
the thread that
Foi
guides
fundamental
everything.
a
And
condição
there
do
is a lot
nosso
of
diretor,
distraction, but it's
Mariano, a estrutura
fundamental
que ele teve de
that our
direção
director
intimista que ele teve
and
próxima da
the
gente,
style of direction that is very intimate, very
isso
close
foi
to us, very
fundamental
close to
para a
the actors.
gente
This
não
is fundamental.
perder
This is the thread that connects everything.
esse
We
elo
never
dos dois que é o que
lose
sustenta a série, né?
that
Mesmo que ela
connection
tenha
between the father
essa
and the son.
estrutura
And
tão
this is
grandiosa.
the pillar of the series, even though we have a big grandiose structure.
Olha, a nossa
Well,
história
our
ela
story,
faz
it has a
ela tem pano
backdrop
de
that
fundo,
has a
né,
very
contexto
interesting
muito interessante, que
context,
é uma linha do
which
tempo
is a
traçada desde os
timeline
anos
that is
70 até os anos
from the
2000,
70s until the year 2000,
de alguma forma
that
vem para
somehow
expor
comes to
desde lá do
it
início da chegada
explains
da
since the
cocaína, como o
beginning
Flávio
of
estava
cocaine,
falando,
arrival of
quando o
cocaine in
personagem dele
Brazil,
ainda era
and
jovem,
the father's
e
character
todas as
was still young,
transformações
and all
sociais
the
que isso
social
gerou.
transformations that
O
permeate all
tráfico de
this,
drogas,
drug
a ação
trafficking, the actions,
despreparada da
the
polícia, a
unprepared
falta de
actions of the
políticas
police,
públicas, até a
and
chegada dos anos
until we can
2000.
get to the year
É,
2000,
no início da
where
série há
we
uma
have at the
previsão
beginning of
ainda
the
nos anos
series, there's
70,
still a
nos anos
prediction
80
in
de que
the
haveria
70s and
em
80s
cada
that we would
morro
have
uma boca
in every
de
favela
fumo
maybe
enfim, um
a
ponto de
place
tráfico de
to do
drogas, e
drug
isso hoje em
trafficking. And
dia
nauadays,
para lá da nossa
this
realidade.
is
E aí
really
eu sempre
demonstrating
falo
our
aqui que você
reality.
pega dos anos
And
2000, que é
you
quando a
can get
série,
from the year
o tempo presente
2000,
da série,
this
e
is
você
the
traz para os dias de
present
hoje,
of the
trazendo
series, and you
para
bring into the
2021,
directors to
e
2021.
infelizmente a
And
sensação que eu tenho é que a
unfortunately,
coisa só piorou.
things
Então,
only
acho que
got
para
worse.
nós a
So
série
it seems
vem,
that
enfim,
to us,
expor mais uma vez
this is
essa
exposing
realidade
once
nossa,
again our
mais uma vez uma
reality,
mazela
once
nossa,
again
enfim,
one of
sem
our
perspectiva
problems,
nenhuma de
without any
melhora,
perspective
só que
of
com um
improvement,
ponto
but with
diferencial
a
em
differentiated
relação às
point
outras obras que
in
tocam
regards to the
nesse tema,
other,
que é de ter isso como
series
pano
that
de
talk about
fundo,
this. Okay, this is the
mas de
backdrop of
ter
our series, but
como fator
the
central a
central
relação familiar,
factor of
esse
the
pai e
series
filho.
is the
Então,
family relationship between the
existe
father and the
ação,
son. So
existe
there is
aventura,
action, there is
existe todo
adventure,
esse
there is
contexto,
the whole
mas
context,
acima de tudo, como eu
but
te falei, assim, a
above
nossa
all,
busca foi o tempo todo de
we
não
are
perder de
always
vista que a gente está
trying
contando uma
to
história
keep in
familiar,
mind that we are talking about a
intimista
family,
entre um pai e filho, que
intimate
estão
history
inseridos
between a
nesse
father and a
contexto
son that
maior.
are in
E
that
eu acho que assim
context
a
of the
história fica
drug.
rica, né? Porque você levanta
And
pontos
this is very
importantes
enriching because you're dealing with
socialmente,
important
inclusive,
social issues, and
provoca reflexão
it makes you
em
think.
todos eles.